You thought we were dead. You forgot about us. You thought we were gone, never coming back. Well, guess what, baby? We are so back. Tino Fera here for another episode of NLL Flash. I wasn't gone. I just moved. As you can see, new background. I moved apartments, so had to take some time off. Get off my back about it. It's been a huge handful of weeks since our last episode. While I was getting things sorted here behind the scenes. Been just an unbelievable slate of games over the past handful of weeks in the National Lacrosse League. We're well into the postseason. We're through round one. We are almost through round two, which is why we are here to get you set for the third and final deciding game in the West Finals between the Colorado Mammoth and the Calgary Roughnecks. We will get to that shortly here to preview that game. Of course, Colorado getting here by dismantling the San Diego Seals. And I mean, last weekend as well, Buffalo makes their way to another NLL Finals, their third straight by, I said dismantling regarding Colorado and San Diego. That's probably the perfect word to use to describe how Buffalo took down the Toronto Rock. Again, we will get into that momentarily. Actually, you know what? Let's get into it right now before we talk about this coming weekend's worth of game singular. Let's look back on the weekend that was and the series that was between the Buffalo Bandits and the Toronto Rock. This was the series that everybody was asking for. Two teams that absolutely hate each other on the floor. Two teams that had excellent regular seasons and two teams that have elite players throughout both of their entire lineups. Unfortunately, though, for the fans of Pandemonium, the Bandits dominated the Rock, who failed to answer. Both games sort of came down to individual stretches of time for Toronto. In game one, it was the third quarter where Buffalo buried 6 unanswered goals, 7 if you include Nanticoke's goal to end the first half. And then in game two, it was the second quarter where Buffalo outscored the Rock 8-1. Just another day at the office in the East Finals for the Bandits, and now for the third straight season, they will be making another trip to the National Lacrosse League Finals with hopes of taking home their first championship since 2008. All right, and now it is time to look ahead to this Saturday night's game, the third and final deciding game. I already mentioned it's coming up between the Colorado Mammoth and the Calgary Roughnecks. So this game will be played in Calgary in front of those just unbelievable fans at the Rough House, the Scotiabank Saddledome, on that iconic WestJet field. So that'll be Saturday, May 20th, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, 9:30 p.m. Eastern, and you can catch that on TSN or ESPN. Time now for us to welcome a first-time guest onto the show, but I'm pretty confident I can say that this is a friend of the program. One, Adam Levi, of course, associated with just every brand you could possibly imagine in the world of lacrosse and box lacrosse specifically, just going down the list here. Inside Lacrosse, NLLPA, NLL.com. Of course, he's the host of the Lacrosse Matrix podcast as well. But most recently, the one of 3 finalists to be nominated for the Tom Borelli Award in the NLL. So, Adam, first of all, thank you so much for making time for us. But second of all, and probably more importantly, how many members of the paparazzi have you been fighting off? Have you been signing babies' foreheads? What's life been like for you since the nomination?
Well, I appreciate the shout out, and I do work very hard every single day, every single week to try and grow this amazing game that we love. I have to say that Preston has definitely been getting a lot more paparazzi than I have, so it's nice to have a more famous family member in the house. I would often also say that my wife gets a lot more attention than I do. She does amazing artwork and has a much larger following on social media than I do. So I still consider myself the third most famous member of the family.
I completely forgot that Preston has been making predictions through the postseason. Have you been keeping track of his record? What's he at so far through the playoffs?
So he went 3-1 in the quarterfinals, which was pretty good. Calgary was the only one that messed him up, and they were so great. They actually, the communications director, Laura Barker, sent me a text message like, so sorry that we screwed this up for Preston, but hopefully he can pick us in the next round. Unfortunately, he did not. He has an affinity for the Mammoth, clearly, so it is not going very well in the semifinals. He picked the Rock and the Mammoth, so we'll see what happens in Game 3, or he'll go 0-2 in the semifinals.
Big weekend coming up for sure. We're going to be touching a ton on the Calgary-Colorado Game 3, which is the only game coming up this weekend, but I want to get your thoughts a little bit on the Toronto-Buffalo series, which, I mean, I think was a little bit faster than what all of us were anticipating. But so let's just touch on that real quick here. Just last weekend, the Bandits just absolutely had their way with the Rock through 2 games. They outscored Toronto 31-15, just ridiculous. And now they're obviously standing by awaiting the results of Calgary versus Colorado this weekend. Did you expect that lopsided of a series, or were you more so like me and were anticipating a third game?
I actually wasn't sure if there was going to be a third game, but I can say that if anyone thought that the games would be this lopsided, they'd be lying to you. To have 2 9-goal wins for the Bandits and really just shutting down the Rock in every single way, really unbelievable performances from them. And then really also surprising to see Nick Rose not have the games that we would have expected him to. So completely shocking series in terms of the goal differential. I don't know necessarily if it was as shocking the ultimate result. The Bandits and the Rock do play very close games when they go head-to-head, but Buffalo has always had this chip on their shoulder really since 2019 when they, with a lot of this group losing in the NLL finals then, and then also, of course, last year in the NLL finals. So they have something to prove, something that's really motivating them to move forward. So I can't say I'm surprised that they moved on.
That is a perfect segue into my next question involving the Bandits, because that's the big elephant in the room right now in the postseason, is the fact that the Bandits have been to the previous 2 NLL finals going back to 2019, like you mentioned, with Calgary, and then last season, of course, losing to Colorado. That's got to be something that's eating away at this core group that's been there for so long together and have had so much regular season success. Is that something that you think this group is using as motivation going forward?
I think to a certain extent. What I can say is that I did speak to Josh Byrne this week, actually, and I know that I don't want to give too much away from the piece on him that's going to be coming out next weekend, or next week on IL Indoor, but Josh did hint at the fact that, you know, it's very difficult to win a championship in the National Lacrosse League, no matter who you are. And if you look at this playoffs in particular, you had guys like Brody Merrill, Ryan Benesh, Callum Crawford all eliminated in the first round there. So those are guys that have played 15 years or more in the National Lacrosse League and still haven't won an NLL championship. Now, this great group of Bandits, they have the potential to win an NLL championship, and this could very well be their year. So I think that it does weigh on them. It sounds like there is a recognition that those were maybe championships that got away from them, but I know that they aren't letting those losses deter them from what could be in the future, and I think we may see them finally seize that trophy in a couple of weeks now.
Okay, now let's move over to the upcoming game, the upcoming series going on this weekend. Of course, Game 3 between Colorado and Calgary, the deciding Game 3. Do you have any explanation as to what it is about the Colorado Mammoth that they suddenly become just a different looking team in the postseason? Like, this is a team that, I mean, realistically kind of stumbled their way through the regular season, ultimately found themselves in a playoff spot, and have just looked completely different than they did throughout this regular season. What is, in your eyes, the biggest difference between this team in the regular season and now in the playoffs?
Well, I think the same thing can be said for what I'm about to say about Colorado that I can say about the Calgary Roughnecks. And I say this with a little bit of a joke, but also not really, that, you know, when you're coached by Pat Coyle, if you think that you're going to, you know, not give 150,000% of your effort in a playoff game, if you think that he's going to let the foot off the gas for any second of any playoff game, then you're kidding yourself. So he is obviously pushing those guys to really come together and be as successful as they have been so far in the playoffs. And you see how much they grind at the very end. All 1-goal games for them. The 1-goal game against the San Diego Seals, which was a phenomenal win for them. And then, of course, the 2 1-goal games, of course, last game being a loss, but still fighting back at the very end there. This is a team that is going to grind for every second, and they're not going to give up. Dylan Ward had told me, and a couple of other players on the Mammoth had mentioned to me, that this core group, they love each other so much. They don't want to stop playing for each other. The passion that they have, the joy that they have when they play together is really remarkable. And it's because of that they aren't going to give up on each other. And I think that aside from their amazing skill and the depth that they have on their roster, is a huge motivating factor and helps them excel in these big games.
I can pretty confidently say that I have not given 150,000% towards anything. So I will be hiring Pat Coyle as my motivational speaker going forward. But Tyler Pace clearly makes such a difference to this Calgary team and just makes their offense click on a completely different level, especially compared to how they play without him in the lineup. What can you say about his individual growth this season as a legitimate star on the right side of this Roughnecks offense? And is there a way for Colorado to slow him down?
Well, so it's interesting that you mentioned Tyler Pace in particular. I was just looking at his numbers, and yeah, if you look at game 1 of Western Conference Finals, 7 goals when he wasn't in the lineup, and then 13 goals, when he was in the lineup, and in that game 2, he had 7 points. So it clearly makes a huge difference. He's a major facilitator on that team, and as I just mentioned about depth, that's a huge factor with this team. But Pace and Jesse King, the captain of the Roughnecks, and then a guy like Tanner Cook and other younger players on that team, Kurt Malosky really wanted them to step up into newer, bigger roles with this team, and you can see that Pace has embraced that role as a facilitator, and you've seen that guys like Tanner Cook have embraced that as scorers. Obviously, Jesse King, since he's been fully healthy over the last couple of years, has really been an X factor there for that team. But yeah, Tyler Pace, if you can get the ball out of his stick and not allow him to reach guys who can have scoring opportunities, that's huge. He was their second leading point getter in the regular season, had a ton of assists. I don't know the number off the top of my head there. I actually have it right here. He had 50 assists and was one of 2 guys on the Roughnecks to have 50 assists in the regular season. And in just 2 games, he's got 15 points. So in the playoffs, so really remarkable what he's been doing. So you just want to, if you got to double team him, you got to get the ball out of his stick. Then that's what you got to do, because clearly he can hit you whether he's scoring or he's facilitating to the goal scorers.
Okay, we've talked already about Preston and his predictions. So I'm going to need a prediction from you here now, Adam. First of all, what do you think is going to be the X factor in this deciding game 3? And then afterwards, give us a prediction as to which team you think will be joining Buffalo in the National Lacrosse League Finals.
So I think it was Teddy Jenner who said it on Coast to Coast as a hot take that all of the games in the conference finals would be won by home teams. Now, of course, that didn't happen in the Eastern Conference Finals, but it looks like to me that that's what's going to happen in the Western Conference Finals here. The Roughnecks to have such a resilient win in a do-or-die game in Game 2 in front of their home crowd. There is not one person on that team who has said anything about how this crowd that they play in front of doesn't motivate them to play better and to do their best. So I think that's going to play a significant factor. But, I know, and I know that you'll be talking with Ty Merrow very shortly, and I know that, while if we want to discuss if faceoffs matter or not, possessions matter. And Chris Willman at the Faceoff X has given Tim Edwards a really good run for his money, and he's been the best faceoff guy that the Roughnecks have had on their roster, not only this season, but if you look at the Roughnecks faceoff guys last year as well, Willman winning about 50% of those draws. So getting those extra possessions is huge. I also think that transition game has really been key. Zach Currier has been really instrumental to adding even more depth on that offensive side of the ball. And you really notice how with the Mammoth, to not have Joey Capito. It's really sad to see them not have their guy running in transition and scoring goals, because he scored so many big-time goals, and it would be great for them. So the transition game and the face-offs, I think, for me, those are two things that I'm going to keep an eye out on. And then, of course, how could you not mention the goaltending? Dylan Ward, Christian Del Bianco, two guys who they've had a couple of good games, each of them in terms of save percentage and goals allowed this postseason, but I wouldn't be surprised if both of them come out and have extraordinarily amazing games in Game 3.
Adam, thank you very much for joining us here on this episode of the NLL Flash. And I know I joked about it off the top, but seriously, man, congratulations on the nomination for the Tom Borelli Award. That's incredible stuff, and you're with some great company there in Pat and Teddy. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy the games this weekend, and enjoy the heat that we're having out here on the West Coast. Try to find some shade while you're at it.
I will definitely try my best. I know Preston is loving the heat. In fact, he and Nikki are at the beach right now.
A big shout out and thank you once again to Adam Levi for joining us on this episode of NLL Flash. Of course, as I mentioned, you can catch all of Adam's work in there at Inside Lacrosse, NLLPA, NLL.com, and of course, the wonderful Lacrosse Matrix podcast, where stats tell the story. But that's going to do it for us here at the NLL Flash. Another episode in the books, and thank you for everyone for your patience during the little hiatus while I got things sorted behind the scenes and moving to a new location and all that jazz. But it's going to be a huge weekend of lacrosse, despite there only being one game. It's about as good of a scenario as you can imagine. Game 3, deciding game. It's going to be unbelievable. So buckle up for a big Saturday night. Can't wait. For all of us here at the NLL Flash, I've been Tino Fera, and we'll see you next time.